Good evening. Good evening. I'm so thrilled, and thank you all for coming for this very, very exciting night we have in front of us to hear from distinguished poets Sonia Sanchez and Marilyn Nelson. Good evening. I'm Stephanie Flom, Executive Director of Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures, and on behalf of Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures, our valued partner, the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, and tonight's co-presenter, who we love partnering with, the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics. Let's hear it for them and Carnegie. White Whale Bookstore is here so that you can purchase Sonia's and Marilyn's many volumes and support a great independent local bookstore. Tonight's format will include a reading by each poet and then a special treat. Sonia and Marilyn will join in conversation with our very own Yona Harvey. The authors will graciously stay to personalize your books and this afterwards, and the line will start right here. Introducing our speakers tonight on behalf of the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics is CAP Director and co-founder Don Lundy Martin. Don is a poet, essayist, and conceptual video artist. She's the author of many award-winning collections, including A Gathering of Matter, A Matter of Gathering, winner of the Cave Canem Prize, Discipline, winner of the Night Boat Books Poetry Prize, and Life in a Box is a Pretty Life, winner of the Lambda Literary Award. Her essays can be found in The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, The Book Forum. Please welcome Don Lundy Martin.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you all for being here. This is definitely a really special evening. I have to thank our funders. I'll do this first so I can get it out of the way so I won't forget, and just in case they look at the recording and, they're like, oh, what happened to us? So I want to thank the Dietrich School of the Arts and Sciences at the University of Pittsburgh, the Dietrich Foundation, and of course, I have to thank Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures for their amazing partnership for this event and many others. I also want to thank Assistant Director at CAP, Lauren Russell, and our CAP Graduate Student Assistant, Willie Kennard, and our interns, and just everyone involved in putting this amazing evening together. So I want to welcome you to what I believe will be an historic event. This is the first event in our Legacies series, and it's a series I wanted to launch not only to honor and celebrate those poets who paved the way for Black poets who are now at early and mid-career, but to also contribute to the big conversation about how African American literature is foundational to American literature. And when we deliberately chart a trajectory from the 18th century Black literature of capture and enslavement by Equiano and the poems of Phyllis Wheatley to the 19th century stories and novels by Charles Chestnut to the blossoming of literature and art during the Harlem Renaissance to the revolutionary aesthetics of the Black arts movement to the range of poetic engagement by post-Black arts movement to the contemporary. If we make this arrangement, we realize that our American literature and the vantage points from which we see this literature might be as constructed as race itself. So what did Toni Morrison say in Playing in the Dark? This is a quote from Playing in the Dark on the longish side, but I want to pay homage to Toni Morrison tonight too, so. She said, "For some time now, I have been thinking about the validity or vulnerability of a certain set of assumptions conventionally accepted among literary historians and critics and circulated as knowledge. This knowledge holds that traditional canonical American literature is free of, uninformed, and unshaped by the 400-year-old presence of first Africans and then African Americans in the United States. She says more, but then she goes on to say, this agreement is made about a population that preceded every American writer of renown and was, I have come to believe, one of the most furtively radical, impinging forces on the country's literature. The contemplation of this Black presence is central to any understanding of our national literature and should not be permitted to hover at the margins of the literary imagination. You might be asking why I'm talking about this now. What does this have to do with anything? Times have changed, you might be thinking. I'm bringing this up because Morrison is asserting that what she's asserting is the converse of the way that the study of literature in this country occurs. She's asserting that the center, the real center, has been removed from the center. And she's wondering about what might happen if Black literature takes its rightful place. How might we read everything else? Both Marilyn Nelson and Sonia Sanchez are crucial to the reconceptualization of American literature. Marilyn Nelson's poems document and rebirth the Africanist presence in history, reimagining the utterances of the slave body, the enslaved body, the bones of that body, her family's genealogy, Emmett Till, and other figures that signal an attempted erasure of the real embodied Black presence. In Sonia Sanchez's poems, a radical politics comes together with visionary imagery and sonic performances that take us to whole other possibilities of both, on the one hand, grief, and on the other hand, dreaming. Both of these women, I believe, and I think you do too, are living legends whose contributions to American literature are deep and necessary. I will read their official bios, which are lengthy. I will read them in, not the entire things, because we'd really be here all evening. Marilyn Nelson, a 3-time finalist for the National Book Award, is one of America's most celebrated poets. She's the author or translator of 17 books of poetry books for adults and children, 5 chapbooks, and in 2014 she published a memoir named as one of NPR's best books of 2014, entitled How I Discovered Poetry. And it's a series of 50 poems about growing up in the 1950s in a military family, each poem stamped with a place and date from the many places they lived. Image Journal writes, quote, American history as conceived by Marilyn Nelson is the inside out, last shall be free first version. She inhabits the voices of the overlooked and disenfranchised and shines light into forgotten corners that reveal essential truths about the whole. But if she is a revisionist historian's poet, she is also a child's poet, a mother's poet, a housekeeper's poet, a scientist's poet. It's this breadth of perspective from pole to pole, past to present, from spheres domestic to atmospheric, that make her so remarkable. Nelson is also an open-handed citizen of the nation of writers. Of her many collections, the Homeplace won 1992 Ainsley Wolf Poetry Award and was a finalist for the 1991 National Book Award. The Fields of Praise New and Selected Poems won the 1998 Poets Prize and was a finalist for the 1997 National Book Award and the Penn Winship Award and the Lenore Marshall Prize. The poems in this collection embrace numerous themes, including the changing nature of love, racism, motherhood, marriage, and domesticity. She also writes young adult literature, Her young adult book, A Wreath for Emmett Till, won the 2005 Boston Globe Horn Book Award and was a 2006 Coretta Scott King Honor Book and a 2006 Michael L. Prince Honor Book. In 2016, her poetry collection, My Seneca Village, won the LA Times Book Award in Young Adult Literature. Her honors are many, so I will just name a few before I welcome her to the stage, and then I will come back up before Sonia Sanchez reads, and I'll read her official bio. Her honors include 2 NEA Creative Writing Fellowships, the 2019 Poetry Foundation's Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize. She was, in 1990, she won a Connecticut Arts Award. She's won Fulbright Awards, Guggenheim Awards, the Frost Medal, which is the most prestigious award from the Poetry Society of America. She's won a Distinguished Lifetime Achievement in Poetry Award. And she's Professor Emerita at the English Department of the University of Connecticut, where I was a student, and she was my very first poetry teacher. I am more than pleased and honored to welcome Marilyn Nelson to the stage.
Thank you, Dawn. Where are you? Thank you. I am very pleased to be here. I have many people to thank too, but I will just thank the Pittsburgh Arts and Letters and the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics and all of the people affiliated with it. And thank all of you for coming this evening. I've been struggling to decide what to read this evening. This is not easy. I thought I would read a long poem, though, and I think I'm going to read this one. I spent some time writing a book called The Homeplace, which is about my family history, and it starts with my grandmother's family who lived in Hickman, Kentucky. And I was there in Hickman doing research, and there's a little CME church right next door to our family's home place. And it's been turned into a local African American history museum. And well, of course, I went in and found a little sign at the door that said Thomas Chapel CME Church is named after its first pastor, Warren Thomas, who was enslaved in Hickman and who was known as a slave to preach to mules. I was much struck by this. How can you not want to write about somebody preaching to mules? And then the museum told the history of the founding of this church, how Warren Thomas founded this church. So this is a longish poem. It's a sequence of sonnets about the founding of Thomas Chapel CME in Hickman, Kentucky. The title of the poem is Thus Far by Faith, which is the motto of the church. And it just tells the history of how the church was founded. It was founded on Easter Sunday of 1866. So the poems all, they are, each of them is built around a sermon, and the readings, the scripture readings that the sermons are based on are given for Easter week. So these are Easter scriptures and Easter sermons, and I think it will take about 20 minutes to read this. So again, it's called Thus Far by Faith. The first one is called Sermon in the Cotton Field. His heart's upwelling of its own accord slackens the reins, stopping the plow mid-row beside a sea of furrows as the word whirling within takes shape. Whoa, brothers, whoa. One mule cranes questioningly. The other nips his neck, ears back. They bray against the hitch which matches them, and Uncle Warren wraps his arms around the sky and starts to preach. Beloved, stop your grumbling. Be the stars what give a twisted generation light. That's what the books say. But old Satan roars louder sometimes than master. He say, hate the whip hand and the yoke. Why be a fool? The Lord Himself were tempted, Brother Mule. Sermon in the Woodlot. I don't know whether I should read the scriptural citations. I don't know whether that will help or not. This one is a reading from 1 Corinthians. Sermon in the Woodlot. The Lord Himself were tempted, Brother Mule, but y'all would try the patience of a saint. There's only a few more loads of lumber to haul. Get up there. You know, master don't know no can't. The books say, run so as to win the crown imperishable. That means man must grunt and sweat from first light till the sun sink down, same as a mule. We can run lightfoot with praise or totin' a croaker sack of dead weight sins around. Come on now, get. The wagon creaks and sways. A mockingbird trills from a branch almost overhead. Uncle Warren nods to a quietly working slave whose bare brown back is crisscrossed with black and red. The mules meander into sunshine, leaving the wood. Sermon in the Ruined Garden. This is a reading from James. A mule meanders into sunshine from the wood near Sally's garden. Almost nothing left after the locust tides of the bereft swept north. Some die for truth, some died for food. Uncle Warren plucks a few choice stalks of grass, chirrups, and holds it in an outstretched hand. The mule flinches just out of reach to stand flat-eared, tail flickering, willful as an ass. Uncle Warren says, you think you smart. Well, don't hee-haw to me about how faith helped you survive the deluge. Save your breath. Show me. Faith without works ain't worth a fart. People is hungry. Act out your faith now by hitching your thanks for God's love to my plow. Meditation over the washtub. The reading is Exodus. Oh, I'm hitching my love for Jesus to my plow. Aunt Sally hums thanksgiving to her Lord, pausing occasionally to wipe her brow, scrubbing wet, soapy darks on the washboard. The clean whites undulate against a breeze scented with hyacinth and simmering greens. So this is freedom, the peace of hours like these, and wages now for every house she cleans. Her singing starts as silence, then her throat fills with a bubble of expanding praise. A deeper silence underlies each note, a lifting mystery, the sky of grace. Aunt Sally sings, "Yes, Jesus is my friend." Hosannas rise like incense on the wind. Palm Sunday, 1866. The reading is from 1 Peter. Make our hosannas incense on the wind. May we wave palms of welcome. Listening from the colored pew, Aunt Sally nods amen. From beside her, T.T., bored and fidgeting, chases his rubber ball into the aisle. The front pew kneels at the communion rail, heads bowed. Aunt Sally, reaching for the child, bumps into Captain Randall. He goes pale with cursing rage, jumps up, and knocks her down. In the hush that follows, the minister proclaims, "Coloreds aren't welcome here from this day on." T.T.'s blue eyes meet hers, sharing her shame. The colored worshipers, silent and grim, file out as the organist strikes up a hymn. Good Friday Prayer, Psalm 51. Defy him, tear his organ off, strike him with righteous lightning, make the devil pay. Uncle Warren paces, has paced since Sunday, wrestling with demons and with cherubim, reaching for heaven, balancing on hell's rim. Life's promise seems to him a vast array of shit and more shit, followed by decay. Now, on Friday evening, he kneels to pray a psalm, remembering his unearned suffering and how he said, "Forgive them, poor, poor fools." The spade of prayer cuts stone, untaps a spring of clear compassion. Uncle Warren feels God present again. Help me do no wrong. The others, well, it's like preaching to mules. Easter Sermon, 1866, the reading from the book of Acts. Others might think it's like preaching to mules, to preach to dark-faced people who sign X laboriously. They listen on cotton bales as Uncle Warren reads from the book of Acts. A rose gold dawn light streams in through the chinks, and roosters hallelujah the sun's return. In a makeshift church reeking with familiar stinks, field hands, bricklayers, and domestics yearn toward Jesus. Well, sir, like the Gospels say, only a handful saw the risen Lord. What was true in them days still holds true today. Be a witness. Pull the plow and sow his word. Come harvest, you'll have love you can give away, and a heart that wells up of its own accord. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. That was amazing. When I just thought I would tell a couple of anecdotes. Maybe they won't be that funny, but when I was in my 20s, I was really shy, and when I was taking a poetry course with Marilyn, I volunteered, I guess, to read an Elizabeth Bishop poem, and I mistakenly pronounced Worcester. And she was like, Dawn, you are from New England. It's Worcester. But I never mispronounced Worcester ever again. It's my pleasure. And you know, if Marilyn was my first poetry teacher, Sister Sonia Sanchez was my second. It was in Marilyn's poetry class that I encountered her work for the first time. And I just thought, oh my God, how can anyone do this with language? And I was the kind of young person when I encountered a poet who wowed me, I would just read everything by that person. Later, when I was a Cave Canem fellow, I encountered Sonia Sanchez again, and I was in her workshop, which just blew me away. And then, because I was still shy, even though maybe I am still, but I was still shy. I was in my late 20s at that point, and we have a closing circle ceremony, and we were asked to participate in a kind of ritual in that closing ceremony. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I have to get outside of myself, and I just couldn't, and I wanted to run in the other direction. But when I looked at Sister Sonia, I just thought, oh my gosh, she's free. Poet, playwright, professor, activist, and one of the foremost leaders of the Black Studies movement. Sonia Sanchez was born Wilsonia Benita Driver on September 9th, 1934 in Birmingham, Alabama. Her mother died when she was very young, and Sanchez was raised by her grandmother until she was 6 years old. Sanchez eventually moved to Harlem with her father, a school teacher, in 1943. She earned a BA from Hunter College and attended graduate school at New York University, where she studied with the poet Louise Bogan. Sanchez also attended workshops in Greenwich Village, where she met poets such as Amiri Baraka and Etheridge Knight and Haki Madhubuti. During the early 1960s, Sanchez was an integrationist, supporting the ideas of the Congress of Racial Equality. But after listening to the ideas of Malcolm X, her work took a different turn. So says the bio, a separatist slant. She began teaching in 1965, first on the staff of the Downtown Community School in New York, and later at San Francisco State College, now San Francisco State University, where I got my master's degree, actually, coincidentally. There was a pioneer, there she was a pioneer in developing Black studies courses, including a class in African American women's literature. We found out in our research at CAP, through the archivist at the library, we documented this fact, and it took a minute, but she was also a part of the group that helped start Black studies here at the University of Pittsburgh. Sanchez is also the author of over 16 books, including a dozen books of poetry, including Morning Haiku, Shake Loose My Skin, New and Selected Poems, Does Your House Have Lions, which is nominated for both the NAACP Image and National Book Critics Circle Award, Homegirls and Hand Grenades, which won an American Book Award, and a Before Columbus Foundation, from the Before Columbus Foundation. Also, I've Been a Woman, New and Selected Poems, a blues book for blue, black, magical women, love poems. This was back in 1973. We Are Bad People, 1970. Homecoming, 1969. She's also published many plays beginning in 1969. She also authored several children's books. Among her many honors are the Robert Creeley Award. She has also received the Frost Medal, the Community Service Award from the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, the Lucretia Mott Award, the Outstanding Arts Award from the Pennsylvania Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Peace and Freedom Award from Women International League for Peace and Freedom, the Pennsylvania Governor's Award for Excellence in the Humanities, a National Endowment for the Arts Award, a Pew Fellowship for the Arts. In 2018, she received the Wallace Stevens Award, given annually to recognize outstanding and proven mastery in the art of poetry. She was the first presidential fellow at Temple University, where she began teaching in 1977. And she held the Laura Carnell Chair in English there into her retirement in 1999. I am more than honored to welcome Sonia Sanchez, Sister Sonia, to the stage.
Well, they bought me a stool, but it's too high. Yikes. I get up there, I'll kind of like, I think I can, well, I can't see you in front, okay? Right? But just pretend I can, all right? How you be? Yeah, it is an honor to be here, and each time I come to the University of Pitt, I think so very much of, I was saying this afternoon, about B.B. Moore Campbell, who was a student of mine at a place called the University of Pitt. Isn't that something? And she was with a bunch of young women who, they were here, but it was hard being here. If you can really envision 1969 in Pittsburgh, and they were scared most of the time, so they stayed in my office most of the time, right? And one day, I said, one night actually, at 8 o'clock, I was going home, I said, simply, hey, sometimes I think we need a course on you women. And you never say that to young, bright women, okay? Because they said, uh-huh. And the next day I came in at 8 a.m., and B.B. Moore Campbell said, yeah, we do need a course. And I said, oh, yeah, a course. What are we going to call it? The Black Woman? Ha, 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 ha. And they all, 20 of them said, yeah. And we did that. We sent the information upstairs to the powers that be, in quotes. And they sent back downstairs saying, what books would you use? And we sent that back upstairs. And lo and behold, we had a course called The Black Woman, the first in America. Isn't that amazing? On a documentary that someone made of me, some people made of me some years ago, in it I was speaking to Questlove, a young man I love because of the work that he does, right? And he was talking about how we had to reinvent ourselves as African Americans. And I said, no, that's the terrible world we invent. Because if you reinvent yourself, at the core of that reinvention is that you didn't like yourself in the first bloody place. I said, no, but I think what I looked at and tried to teach my students at some point, that I had to reimagine myself in this American landscape. And I think our enslaved, ancestors did that. That each day you got up, you had to reimagine yourself each day as you went out into those fields, people. Until you went into those kitchens, whatever, until you slept at the bottom of the bed so the slave master could get up and take advantage of you, rape you, have sex with you, even while your wife slept, And you had to reimagine yourself the next day that, okay, I'm okay. That didn't happen. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. I shall be okay. I will be okay. I will be okay. And so every 10 or 15 years, you must reimagine yourself in this American landscape, which means you take a look at it and see what's going on and how you live in it. Otherwise, you don't make it. I'm not being funny on this one. I'm being quite serious. And this is for everybody who believes in democracy in this place called America. If you believe in this country, you cannot stay the way you are with those same ideas that you think, well, I'm right because I'm white. No, you ain't. You know, or I'm black and I'm stupid. No, you ain't. Whatever. We got to change this, if you understand truly, for us to survive what is going on in America. And you can't stay the same thinking, well, I gave money to the NAACP. Is that so? Well, what do you give of yourself in those classrooms? When children walk into that classroom without information, what do you do when a child walks in and that child comes in face unwashed and you say, ah, dirty little kid? You know, you do what I did. You take that kid in and you wash his face and you hum to him while you do it. What a pretty little face you have. And you wash that face, you wash those hands, and you ask the super in that school, can I come in here early? Will you open it up for me? And what do? You bring to your room, fruit, not candy, not potato chips, fruit. Stuff for them to eat, whatever. And you bring music so they can hear the music also. And you bring little puzzles, and you bring little books for them to read, because these are our children. I don't care if you're white, black, green, purple, blue. When I taught your children, they were my children, period. And I expect the same of you, finally, in this place called America. So I want to thank Stephanie, Sister Dawn. She thinks I don't remember her in those classes, but I always remember. Yeah, my children always say, you don't forget a thing, Mom. But what I remember was her genius with words. And it continues also, too. And I thank her for being in those classes sometimes when I would begin to preach and tell people what they needed to do in between the poems. But the point is, that was the poem, if you understand. And Sister Marilyn Nelson, it is always an honor to read with you, because you bring the herstory, not history, the herstory of us as a people surviving with humor, with understanding, with pain, with joy. When they rewrite finally, and we are trying to do that as we rewrite the herstory and history of America, that people will begin to understand how much an integral part we were of this place called America. And also, you and I understand, for us to really grow, we've got to begin to make all the places like this place here. There's some stuff happening in a place called Pittsburgh, make this a holy place again. This earth has got to be made holy before we can move out of what we're into today. And that is complete lies. I mean, people who speak lies, and then at some point we accept the lies. Oh, that's just him doing that. No, it ain't just him doing that. That's someone lying. And we've got to understand that is not moral. This is not the morality that we want for this place called America. And I think that we've got to deal with that, in no uncertain terms. Sister Yona, I look forward to our conversation. With those questions that you will come and ask us, right? And I told her I will make a decision if I answer them. I'd like to pay honor to a great woman, Toni Morrison, one who taught us so very much about what it means to be human, to walk upright as a human being. Within a period of about a week, Gloria, oh wow. Why am I blanking on Gloria's name? Gloria Joseph, thank you, Marani. The great Gloria Joseph, who was the partner of Audre Lorde, and they were such dear friends of mine, made transition, and Sister Toni, and the novelist, Brownstone, yep. that sister. Yeah, what's her name? Somebody. Brownstone Girls. Paula Marshall, that's right. Within a week of each other, they made transition, and it was just a hard time looking at the people within the last 3 years who had made transition. Great people, great writers, and great human beings. And because I write everything by longhand, people will say, well, will you introduce Miss Morrison? And I said, yes, and I would go searching for it. And then, of course, I couldn't find it. So I would sit down the night before and write something. So this is an introduction of Toni Morrison, 5/18/12 in Philadelphia. You said we die. That may be the meaning of life. But we do language. That may be the measure of our lives. And my dear sister, Toni Morrison, how you do this thing called language, the measure of our lives, how you recapture our words, untangle this language, how you stand words up, let them minuet our blood, how you open up the sorcery of language, spitting teeth on the wonder of words, recapturing the wings of our most sacred vowels. Listen, you say. Summer is around the bend, and you anoint our eyes with surprise, bring us into the flesh of rain and laughter called paradise, love, Sula, jazz, the bluest eyes, Song of Solomon, tar baby, beloved, a mercy, God help the child. We commandeer your words spinning under this domestic sky, and they become a river, moving against winter sails, repelling ice water ghosts, kneeling on razor-thin knees at confession. Our bodies are tattooed forever with your quicksilver tongue, and we are one, alive, apart from the elasticity of the dead. The day comes, my dear sister, breathing in your eyes of silk, and I remember your words, don't tell us what to believe, what to fear. Show us belief's wide skirt and the stitch that unravels fear's cave. And I thank you for this prose stitch called home, where men and women, shipwrecked with flesh and disguise, graveyard memories settling in their feet, walk themselves back home in air as black as their smile, their hearts still searching for gusts of life as they dress their limbs in starched bones and new memory. I put on my eyes, my dear sister. I am in the eyelash of your memory, where there is always a small miracle called home. A piece for Toni Morrison. I might have taken up all my time with that little talk I did in front, so I will perhaps just read, we were going to read poems from each book, so therefore you would come up and purchase the book. But we know you would purchase the book anyway, right? Thank you, right. I'd like to read then from Does Your House Have Lions? It's a book I did for my father. I was taking care of him the last 6 years of his life, and I said to him, I'm writing a poem about you, a book about you and your son, my brother. And he says, I hope you get me right this time, girl. And what he meant by that is that, of course, I had done some early morning poems about my father, and him being a ladies' man, right? And all of that kind of stuff, right? And he said, finally, if you get me right. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, Sonia, you must know that your mother was the only woman I ever loved. All the rest of them were, So I did this poem, a poem for my father, then I'll do what I did later on. How sad it must be. This ambiance is really great, but I can't see up here on this stage. Because you turn the lights up, yeah, it's beautiful. I used to love it. Thank you. I can see the book now, okay? How sad it must be to love so many women, to need so many black perfumed bodies weeping underneath you. When I remember all those nights, I fill my mind with long wars between short-sighted Trojans and Greeks, while you slap some wide hips about in your private dungeon. When I remember your deformity, I want to do something about your makeshift manhood, I guess. That is why on meeting your sixth wife, I crossed myself with her confessionals. And so that's the poem my father was referring to, right? But I wrote something called Does Your House Have Lions? For my brother and for my father. And there's a quote from Joel Dorn that says, one day in the late 60s, I was on the phone with Rasan Roland Kirk and mentioned to him that just that day I had bought a house. He responded by asking, does your house have lions? I said, what? He said, lions, you know, like in front of a museum or the post office. And I would add, or bank. You know, concrete lines. My house has lions. Get a house with lions. Sister's voice. When I started to write this book, I said, I'm going to write this book and it would be my voice. And then in the midst of writing it, my brother's voice, who had been dead for a number of years, said, you know, where's my voice? So I said, right, okay. So then I began to write in his voice. And then my father says, all right, where's my voice in this? I said, well, I'm going to write you. I'm going to write about you. He said, no, I want my own voice, Sonia. So I slammed the book shut, right? And figured out that I really, I do two books at the same time. And so I went back to the book I was writing, right, the other one, and sent it to my publisher. And she said, I thought you were doing a book on your father. I said, that book will never be finished, right? And then coming home from Temple one day, I turned on the radio, and there was this song that went, ancestors, that's how it started, I said, just like my ancestors, right, in my book, right? And I went slower and slower, and people started honking horns and giving me the finger. And I remember pulling up next to the guy, and I let down my window and said, you know, you want to hear some beautiful music? Let down your window. Oh. It is nice being a poet because you can be crazy, you know? My children, when they were little, 7 and 8, I would open the door, they're in Germantown, right? And the rain would be summer rain. You know how sweet summer rain is? Yeah, and I would run outside and say, come on, children, and they would come out, we would dance in the summer rain. And it got to be about 10, and I opened the door one morning in the summer rain, and I said, come on, let's dance, Marani and Mungu. And they stood in the door looking at me. And I said, come on, it's sweet, it feels good. They said, oh, no, Mom, we can't do that. I said, why not? Because some of our partners might come by and see us. I said, well, I'm dancing in the rain. They said, yeah, but you're a poet, Mom. Even your children. This is the sister's voice. This was a migration, and this is in rhyme royal. Those of you who write, poets, hands, thank you, rhyme royal. So you know it's a heck of a little old thing, A, B, B, C, C, right? Yeah. And you live with a rhyming dictionary, right? And you change a rhyme at the end, and what happens, you got to change the other lines also, too. So one night, I took the rhyming dictionary and threw it across the bedroom, turned out the light, turned over to go to sleep, and after 15 minutes, I got up, turned the light on, picked it up, and said, excuse me, I didn't mean to do that. Because I was living with that rhyming dictionary, right? Sister's voice. This was a migration, unlike the 1900s, of black men and women coming north for jobs, freedom, life. This was a migration to begin, to bend a father's heart again, to birth seduction from the past, to repay desertion at last. Imagine him short and black, thin mustache scraping thin lips. Imagine him country and exact, thin body, underfed hips, watching at this corral of battleships and bastards, watching for forget and remember, dancing his pirouette. And he came, my brother, at 17, recruited by birthright and smell, grabbing the city by the root with clean metallic teeth, commandant and infidel, pirating his family in their cell, and we waited for the anger to retreat, and we watched him embrace the city and the street. First, he auctioned off his legs, eyes, heart, in rooms of specific pain. He specialized in generalized, learned New Yorkese and all profane, enslaved his body to cocaine, denied his father's signature, damned his sister's overture. And a new geography greeted him. The Atlantic drifted from offshore to lick his wounds, to give him slim transfusion as he turned, changed, wore a new waistcoat of solicitor, antidote to his southern skin, ammunition for a young paladin. And the bars, the glitter, the light, discharging pain from his bygone anguish of young black boys scared of the night. Sequestered on this new bank, he surveyed the fish, sweet cargoes crowded with scales, fevers with quick sails, full sails of flesh, searing the coastline of his acquiesce. And the days rummaging his eyes, and the nights flickering through a slit of narrow bars, hips, thighs, and his thoughts labeling him misfit as he pranced in the starlit city, coloring his days and nights with gluttony and praise and unreconciled rights. My brother, coming north. He came north in a green suit. I said, if I do nothing else, and it wasn't like hip northern green, you know, it was green. And so I said, if I do nothing else, I got to get him out of that green suit. And then my father would talk about his son coming to his daughter's house in Philadelphia. Father's voice. The day he traveled to my daughter's house, it was June. He cursed me with his morning nod of anger as he filtered his, As he filtered his callous walk, skip, hop, feet slipshod from 125th Street bars, face curled with odd reflections. The skin of a father is accented in the sentence of the unaccented. And my father then talks about himself. I was a Southern Negro man playing music, married to a high yellow woman who loved my unhurt face, who slept with me in Nordic beauty. I, prisoner since my birth to fear, I unfashioned, buried in an open grave of mornings unclapped with constant sight, with masters fattened, decked with my diminished light. I'm going to see if I can get more light by moving this way. Whoa. This love, this first wife of mine, died in childbirth. This face of complex lakes exiled her breath into another design, and I died, became wanderlust, demanded recompense from friends for my heartbreak, cursed the land for this new heartache, put her away with a youthful pause, never call her name again, wrapped my heart in gauze. And then my father talks about how he became a ladies' man, became Romeo bound, applauded women as I squeezed their syrup, drank their stencil face, danced between their legs, placed my swollen shank to the world, became man distilled, early 20th century black man, fossil, fulfilled by women things, for closing on my life. Mother, where do I go before I arrive? And then he talks about my stepmother, my brother's mother. She wasn't as beautiful as my first wife, this ruby-colored girl, insinuating her limb against my thigh, positioning her wild life, her non-virginal smell as virginal, her climbed towards me with slow walking heels, made me limp, made me stumble, made my legs squint until I stopped, stepped inside her footprint. And then he asked forgiveness. I did not want to leave you, son. This flame, this pecan-colored festival requested me, not my child, your sister. Your mother could not frame herself as her mother, and I absentee father, and I nightclub owner carefree, did not heed her blood, did not see my girl's eyes shaved, buckled down with southern thighs. Now, my 78 years urge me on your land. Now, my predator legs pray, broadcast no new nightmares. No longer Birdman of Cornerstone comes. I come to collapse the past. While bonfires burn up your orphan's mass, I sing a dirge of lost black southern manhood. This Harlem man begging pardon, so creeding old. And this poem goes on, and my brother finds out that he's sick, that he has something that the doctors cannot make out in Lenox Hill. And later on, we find out that it was AIDS. He and another young man in the hospital were dying, and they could do nothing about it at all. And so my brother also will leave my house in Philadelphia, and he will go home after I tell my brother finally, let me straighten out these glasses and maybe it'll get better. Okay. He will leave my house and go to my father's house in a place called New York City. And because I will at some point begin to tell him exactly what his mother had done to his father's children. And he would go to my father's house, and this is my brother's voice, where he goes to ask forgiveness of his father. There is nothing I do not comprehend. I have become a collector of shouts. Hold my ears, Father. I have come to mend our hearts, raise a glass, celebrate, root out lyrical slaughters, become your only son devout. I have become a lover of sweet water. I worship stone. I will not betray you, Father. Father's voice. Steady your hand, old man. Do not trouble yourself with language. Stalk his wound. He is listening to your corpuscles, cradle the clap and thunder of a new sound. He has called your name and old teeth are found. Can you hold me, son, as I rise from this whimper? Can you hear me, son, as I cross over this river? And the father and son are reconciled, and my father will call me and say, you know, Sonia, Wilson came home and he asked forgiveness, and it is so good having a son. I said, yeah, Dad, it is good having a son. No, it is good having a son. I said, yeah, Dad, it is good having a son. Oh, it is wonderful we're reconciled. It is so good having a son. I said, yes, Dad, it is good having a son and a daughter. Which he told me when he was 96, when he was ill. He says, come over here. When I read this book to him, he said, you got me right, and I'm so proud of you. Whoa. But my brother will began to get ill, and when I would visit him in the hospital and wipe him off, he would say, don't touch me, it hurts. And he says, there's somebody in here with me. And I thought he was hallucinating. But when I wrote this piece, I realized that the ancestors were in that room with him. Ancestors' voice, do you remember me, huh? When our teeth were iron, huh? Did you drum about me, hey? And not Babylon, hey? Did you take your weapon, huh? Rattle it on any mattress, huh? Till you became powerless, hey, 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 hey. Ancestors' voice, female. Do you remember me, huh? yeah, 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 yeah. When our wombs were cerebral, ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Did you dream about me? Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. And not betrayal. Ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Did you take your coastal blood to any playground? Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. To every resident clown. And so we go back with the ancestors, they come, and they began to speak in Wolof to my brother. Because I maintain, since our language was taken away from us, when we began to make transition, we would begin to hear the language of our people, where we were situated on the continent of Africa. And Wolof was my father's, my brother's also too. But it's late, and I won't say that part. I'll say the last one, when the ancestors come and rescue my brother. Ancestors' voice, family, male. Salam alaikum, hello, female. Nangadef, how are you? Male. Salam alaikum, hello, brother. Mangafi rek, I am well, brother. Dama bugalek, I want to eat, brother. Dama buganan, I want to drink. Male, female ancestor, Kaifi African, Kambi African, Kaifi African, Kambi African, brother. Manginio, I am coming. Manginio, I am coming. Manginio, I am coming. And that's the book that I did, part of it, for my father and for my brother and for our family. Thank you very much.
We are not done yet. Thank you very much for both of your amazing readings. Wow. Yona Harvey will facilitate a brief conversation, and then we will have a book signing. So we still have a lot of this. It is already an historic evening to go. My colleague Yona Harvey is an American poet. She is the recipient of the Kate Tufts Discovery Award for her first collection, Hemming the Water. Her second poetry collection is coming out in 2020. It's called, this is one of my favorite titles for poetry books of all time, You Don't Have to Go to Mars for Love. She is one of the first 2 Black women to write for Marvel Comics and a professor at the University of Pittsburgh.
Thank you both for those readings. Okay, I'm going to keep it brief. In the past, each of you have spoken or commented so eloquently and urgently about storytelling and language and the power of that language on people. Marilyn Nelson, your book, A Wreath for Emmett Till, comes to mind, and Carver, and Sister Sonia, Homegirls and Hand Grenades, Does Your House Have Lions? Can you say more about the ways that telling stories in your poems has shaped the way that you write and how you decide which stories to tell?
Gosh, I don't know. Sometimes it's just seeing something, seeing people. I do a piece called Just Don't Never Give Up on Love about an old woman on the bench in the park, and a professor calling me from a journal saying, Ms. Sanchez, have you finished that review for the journal? And I said, yes. And he said, well, how long is it? I said, it's the length of a review. And I hung up the phone. I had not read the book, and I had not written the review, but I got my children, said they were learning how to ride 10-speed bikes, and we went to the park, and I've forgotten how crowded the park is with nannies and mothers and aunties and grandmothers and sand and noise. And I searched for a bench, and I found one away from all of that, and I said to the children, if you need me, I'm here. You got to come here. And I saw this old woman who was sitting there with her eyes closed, And I kind of crossed in front of her, and coughed, so she would open her eyes. And my look says, "Not today. I don't have time to talk to you. I got to read a book and write a review at the same time." And I sat with my back to her. And that was it. And all of a sudden, I felt someone moving closer to me, right? And I turned around, and this woman had moved across the bench right underneath me. And she said, and the first thing she said, "I guess you think I never loved, girl." You know. You know? And if I would have been rude if I had a piece of, if I wanted to write what she just said. I said, "You got to remember that, you got to remember that," right? And that began that piece about when you're young, you have young children, you think you got it all made, whatever, and you see someone like that, you say, what does she know about life? But this woman, in the piece, I said she had been married 3 times, but she'd been married 5 times. And I looked at her and said, "God damn, 5 times you've been married, right? You know, I've been married a couple times myself. That's not so bad, right? I can catch up with you." And the joy of that. And I went home that night and I wrote, and I came back the next day, right? And she was there on the same bench. And she said, in the piece I write, I said, "You come out here often or something?" She said, "Yeah, I might as well come out here. I guess one day I'm going to die on this bench," right? But the point of the piece was that she said, I wrote the piece, I said she was 84 because a lot of the young people don't think someone 90, she was really 94, had the smarts, could tell me all this about her loves and the one man she loved in her life, and how he made her feel. All this is being poured on me when all I wanted to do was write a review. But she was telling me how to live. She was telling me how to love. And she was telling me, just don't give up on love. Just don't never give up on love, because sometimes we do give up on love. You know what I mean? And I had given up on love. And the point is that there, for 2 days, each time I came and listened to her, she made me whole again. This 94-year-old woman sitting on a bench with her eyes closed initially, and she told me her life story. And I looked, and so I was able to understand that she was sitting in that park, right? But she had been a woman sitting on bar stools too. Because you look at your parents and you could not have been on a bar stool. Yes, they were. On many bar stools, probably, right? But the point that I'm making is that we live and we evolve, and we look up, and whatever she smelled on me when I came to that park, whatever she saw when she opened those jaundiced eyes, she said, "I got to help this young lady. I got to help this young girl. I got to help her be." And, so that kind of thing evolves sometimes from just being in a park, sitting on a bench. Right. Yeah.
What about you, Marilyn? Or maybe even how the stories are shaped?
How the stories are shaped. I have not had such a wonderful experience as this, but I have had the experience of being open to stories, and when you're open and willing to receive them, they appear, they come to you, and I read the piece about this church history and the man preaching to mules. This is a story that came to me, or other stories I've received have been stories about Tuskegee Airmen, for example. I write, for the most part, about his history. And I find so many truly wonderful stories by doing historical research, stories that teach me things about not only history, but also about who we are, what it means to be alive, what it means to exist. And I read a poem today or yesterday, I don't know, I've been doing a lot of poems, in which I incorporated a sentence a Tuskegee Airman told me. He was telling me about flying out of Ramatelli Air Base in Italy during the war. And he said that they slept in tents they had, air mattresses. And his air mattress leaked, and his tent mate's air mattress didn't. So every time they went out on a mission, he switched the air mattresses. It was a kind of a joke between the two of them. And one day, they're out on a mission, and his tent mate was shot down. And he said, so I used his air mattress for the rest of my tour. It still bothers me sometimes. I was sleeping on his breath. A story that was like gold coins falling on me. And I have the feeling that people have stories, and if you're a writer, part of your job is to listen for stories. I have been at readings at which readings at which young poets are reading their poems, and somebody comes up. This happened. A man came up at a reading. I was in a workshop with Mary Carr. Some of you will know Mary Carr. She was reading a poem, and this man came up and pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and asked her if she would read this. And she said, "Let me finish my poem first." And then he was Native American. It was from his wife on the reservation. She was asking him to come home. She was saying that they could make it together, that she loved him. He was carrying this in his pocket. It was a story that he recognized was worth sharing. It was something that was a gift that he gave to Mary so that Mary could share it with the people in the audience. And I've found this is one of the most powerful experiences of letting people know that you're a writer. When they say, "Oh, I've got a story. Here's a story." So I don't know whether this answers your question.
Well, if not, it was great.
Yeah. Your father was a Tuskegee Airman. Your mother was a school teacher, and you come from an artistic family. And you were also shaped very early on by a black librarian in New York.
Jean Hudson, Miss Hudson from Schaumburg.
Can
Well, my
you-
dad was a
At the
musician.
Schaumburg,
Can you talk about how that, those influences and that background helped you to become the poets you are and release these stories?
I don't know. I do believe that people are born poets or writers. You know, you might go and you get help in terms of learning how to write in a workshop or with someone. But I was a reader. One of my aunts taught me how to read when I was 4. And so I've always been a reader. And I started writing little ditties, like dun 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 kind of poem when you were little, and that was always a joy. And my grandmother said simply, she would say to them, I didn't realize that she was not a good reader, and she would have my aunts read everything that I had written, and I understood it later on when my dad talked about her. And they would read it, and my grandmother would say, "This is just simply great," and she would praise me. This woman who loved me, and my sister. My mom died when I was 2, giving birth to twins. And some years later, I gave birth to twins. But I was one of those terrible little kids, you know, in that my aunt said, because I would go outside and play. You know, I would jump, climb trees, you know, jump over whatever, drive one of those little wagons down a hill from the top into the bottom. I did all of that, and my sister, who was the most beautiful little girl you could ever imagine, who grew up to be a most beautiful woman also too, would go outside to play clean and come back home clean, you know. And my aunts would say, "Oh, isn't she beautiful? Isn't Patricia beautiful? Is she such a lady?" And I would go outside to play and come home with my pigtails out and whatever, ragged, torn, and they would say, "Tish, tish, tish, she just will never be a lady," which was good, you know. But Mama saved me. But the thing that I realized about me is that she saved me. And the most important thing is when she died when I was 6, I became a stutterer. And so I was a child as we would shuttle from house to house. But don't. And that, so I would, my stutters came before me. My sister and I came into the house, and they said, "Oh, look at Patricia. Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she beautiful?" And the terrible thing about being a beautiful little girl is that if you have no protection, people touch you. Mm-hmm. But the other thing about being mean, not beautiful, and a stutterer is that they gave you a book and put you in the corner and left you alone, you know. And I always regretted that for my sister, if you understand that. When I was younger, I felt like, oh, God, she's beautiful. But as I got older, I recognized, you know, what that was and what that had done to her as a young woman, as a young girl and as a young woman. But I also understood, too, that my grandmother allowed me to be. And so as I moved on this earth, I always carried her inside of me. And I always knew at some particular point that I would write, because she always praised my writing. She always praised what I did. She always thought that I was this child who should be left alone to do what she wanted to do. And I was a child when I played only with the boys, because the girls were just standing there looking pretty. And one day someone said, there was this big discussion about who was going to be the leader. And so I said, let's figure it out. So I said, came to our house, and I went in the house and got to the window, climbed on the window, and said, I'm going to jump to the first floor. And all these boys ran to my grandmother to tell them that I was jumping out the window, but I had figured out there was a tree right by my window. And if you jump, you could hit the tree and slide down. The problem is I jumped too hard and really hurt myself, right? But the point of that was that I got up off my knees, and Mama washed my knees with mercurochrome, right, if anyone remembers that, and said, go in and play. And I said, I'm the leader now, right? And that was fine for a day, but the next day, my dear sister, we came outside and played together. It didn't matter who was the leader. We played together. We worked together. And all along that period when we were with people who were not friendly necessarily before we moved to New York City, I wrote. I kept a diary. I read. And I encountered a woman by the name of Miss Jean Hudson at a place called the Schomburg. I got out of Hunter College at 19 and a half, and I went up to the Schomburg. And I walked into the Schomburg, and there was a long, long table, and nothing but men were there with books stacked high. And there was a glass door, and I knocked on the door, and I said, I told her my name, and she said, my dear, my name is Miss Hudson. And I said, I said, what is the Schomburg? She said, oh, my dear, the Schomburg is a library that has books only by and about Negroes. And I said, there must not be many books in here then, huh? Whoa, you heard that. Smart mouth, right? Because who in the world had known about books? I mean, by Negroes at some point. And she sat me down at a table with all these men. She found a space for me and said, wait. 20 minutes later, she brought me 3 books, Up From Slavery, Souls of Black Folk, and the top one, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Whoa. And I began reading that, and when the mind and the tongue and the eyes and the ears became accustomed to Black English, that is not dialect. You teach it, you don't teach it, it's Black English, okay? And it became accustomed to it, right? I slid out, and I knocked on the door, and I had tears in my eyes. I said, how could I be a graduate of Hunter College going to NYU, and I never came across this book. She said, oh, my dear, settle down. She said, I'm going to give you all the books that you need. I went back in, slid in, and read some more until I got to half the book, slid out again, did the same thing again, and she escorted me back to the long table. And one of the African scholars said, Miss Hudson, make this young woman sit down or she has to leave. And I stayed the whole summer and read the whole summer, cried the whole summer, learned the whole summer, began to write in that library seriously the whole summer. They sent me to Mr. Michaud, who gave me books, African-American books. They sent me to Mr. The West Indian, who had a bookstore 125th Street, and he gave me all the West Indian literature. Isn't that amazing? And I became a person who read this literature, and I saw myself for the first time, this little girl who had studied through college even, people, saw herself as a woman, a human being, free of stutters, although they never leave you, they're at the base of your skull, but free of speaking stutters, but a person who could then, at some particular point, look up and say, I am important. I am Black. I am a woman who knows something, who will at some point perhaps contribute, to us, to our people, to all people, to this country, that I will do what Miss Hudson did. She gave me life. She gave me light. And when she was dying, there in Harlem, I would take her things to eat. And I said to her, Miss Hudson, what did you see in me that made you take the time with a person who said there must not be many books in here? And she smiled through that pain. And she said, we know when we see them. And you, Mr. Michaud and the other brother, we knew that we had to give you these books because we knew that you would contribute to us finally on this earth.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
I was saying earlier, I don't know, we were at lunch, how when Sister Sonia speaks, she is so open and so free, and she cries so easily, where so many of us will cover that up. So, thank you.
Yes, it's a gift. Thank you. Yeah.
Marilyn, do you want to say anything about your early influences?
What can I say? At least
You don't
I
have to.
grew up in a family that honored literature and that believed my mother. I was a very sensitive child. I was shy and sensitive, and I cried all the time at beautiful things. If it's a beautiful rose bush in front of somebody's house, I would start crying. It's a beautiful sunset. I would cry. And people were always asking my mother, is your daughter all right? And she would always put her arm around my shoulders and say, yes, this is Marilyn, she's our poet. And yeah, so I always knew that that's who I was, and I was always being pushed to read and pushed to the library. My father, we moved around a lot, but there was a little family library that moved with us, and one of the books in the, probably no more than 25 books that moved with us all the time, and one of them was a poetry anthology, which became my book. And so I don't remember when I started writing, but I know I started seriously reading poetry because of that anthology when I was young, and I had my father wrote poems and was glad to share them, and on birthdays he would give us a card with a poem he had written for us. And we moved a lot, but I had one teacher in middle school, the only time we went to segregated schools. We were stationed in Texas, and I went to Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School. I was in 7th grade, I think, 7th or 8th grade, and the English teacher, Miss Jackson, first of all, every day began with her reading a Paul Lawrence Dunbar poem to us. That was the way we started the day, which was a wonderful thing that she did. And then she started bringing me poetry books. And I don't know where she went to school. I didn't know her. But she had a very large personal collection of African American poetry. And so I was going home from school regularly carrying a couple of poetry books. And that's where that started me.
Right.
That was my earliest encouragement, I think.
I think I'm getting the signal to wrap things up. But I want to thank you both for, I mean, you write everything, but you've done so much work for young people, children's books, young adult literature. I think we have some students who are bussed in tonight just to hear you.
Wow,
So I want to
really?
thank you for that.
I didn't know
And maybe you'll meet them when the book signing happens. So thank you very much, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.